Hi, I'm Hayley Victoria and welcome back to my crime and policing channel. As you can see, it's getting pretty festive in the UK, woohoo! I don't know if you can see outside my window as well, but it's snowing. It's quite cosy. I've got a fire on. Got my little festive ornaments out, look. Oh. So yeah, welcome to winter in the UK. It's always cold. And we have like a few days where we're proper buzzing because it's snowing, then we all just get a bit fed up of it. Anyway, we're still in the buzzing stages. What we are going to look at today, apart from the weather, clearly, is crimes that are committed around this time of year, and just to help us consolidate our knowledge. So we're going to look at some of the key things that we'll look at, you know, witness, forensic evidence and things like that. Link it to real life cases to help us absorb all that knowledge. As I've mentioned before, we look at real cases. So there's real victims and their families involved. So there's no glamorization of any killers ever going to happen in my videos. So if you're looking for that kind of serial killer fandom, you're not going to find it here. Because I think that anyone's a killer is a bit of a loser, well, a massive loser, and they've committed some really despicable crimes. What we're going to look at, however, is the evidence behind stuff and really go into those details. And we're going to look at some festive crimes to get us into the spirit and to help learn. Yay! And the first thing we're going to look at today is a really sad case of Ed and Minnie Marin. So Ed was 81, Minnie was 83, a much loved couple, parents and members of the community. A really nice couple, lovely American family, you know, really nice family. Never had any trouble with anybody, just, yeah, well-rounded, well-nice people. And unfortunately, their bodies were found on Christmas Eve in 1985 at the end of a dead-end road in Chehalis where they lived. So how had these well-respected, well-loved people ended up being found dead? And the wounds that they'd sustained were shotgun wounds to the backs of their bodies. So our ballistic experts and blood pattern analysis have been there and had a look at it, and they can see that, you know, sustained gunshot wounds with like a sawn-off shotgun, and, you know, incompatible with life. They died at this, well, not at the scene they were found at, but they died because of those wounds. So I've just mentioned there, they didn't die at the scene they were found at. So what actually happened then? They were found Christmas Eve, but how did this much-loved couple get there? Well, a few days before that, on the 19th of December, family members did report them missing because they hadn't turned up to a party, which is very unlike these people. You know, they love wholesome family people. They're always at parties, you know, when there's a celebration going on with the family, they're there, but they weren't there, which sparked alarm with the family. They reported them missing, and the car was missing also. The very day after they were reported missing, they found the car. Now, in that car, there was a lot of blood, like, you know, a lot of blood, and the keys were still in the ignition, which that led to the investigation because police officers were really worried then. So remember, we were a few days before actually finding the couple, so they're like, there's a lot of blood in here, the ignition's not there, what's going on? Now then, when the investigation started, witnesses said they had seen the Marin's car near the Sterling Savings and Loan Bank in the city centre, wherever they lived, town centre, and that Ed had withdrawn $8.5 thousand in cash, which is an unusual amount of money for him to be drawing out. You know, like, who takes out $8.5 grand? Nobody, right? So that was a sparked concern there. And there were some prime suspects already, which were the Riff brothers. Now then, this is where it gets a bit weird, because the Riff brothers were like notorious bad eggs in that area, and nobody was speaking out, and they had nowhere to go with it. And then for 27 years, the family had to wait for justice to prevail. So imagine the agony of not having that closure. I mean, I've lost a family member very close to me, and we had that closure in a couple of months. But 27 years is ridiculous. It's a lot of pain. So what happened then? So we know that the car was found with a lot of blood in it in the ignition, and the car keys in the ignition. And we know that from the forensic evidence, looking in the car and at the scene where the bodies were discovered, that there's been sawn off shotgun wounds to the victims' backs of their bodies. We know that they've been dragged to this wooded area at the end of this dead-end road. And we know the car is being involved. We know all these things. We know there's it's happened at the bank, which can help us build a picture of what happened. And we've seen the car being driven around the town centre. Now, a deputy also, apparently, this is only from one news article, pointed out that they'd seen who they thought were the Riff brothers driving the car, but they had no other evidence to back it up. What happened there then? Well, what happened was 27 years later, a witness spoke out, and they said that they had, the Riff brothers had been involved, and they had kidnapped, robbed, and murdered the Marins for their money. And because of this witness evidence that came through, apparently they were like a friend of the Marins as well. The police tried to track down the Riff brothers. One of them had actually just passed away. John Riff had just passed away before they could be apprehended for the crimes. They'd moved to Alaska 2 years later, by the way. But Rick, his younger brother, was extradited back to Lewis County and charged with the murders of both Ed and Minnie. 2 counts of, that's first degree murder of both of those, 2 counts of first degree robbery and a count of first degree burglary. So as I mentioned, his brother had already passed away before that. What also happened was, so the story then obviously developed, or the cold case was finally solved. And what had happened is that Ed and Minnie had been kidnapped from their home. They'd been driven to the bank by the Riff brothers. Ed had been forced to take out a lot of money, obviously $8,500. They'd then been killed in the car with a sawn-off shotgun and dragged to the location. The brothers had then taken all the money, gone on some mad cocaine, fueled spree, and then moved to Alaska, where they remained until obviously John died and Rick was caught. Thankfully, witnesses play a huge part in the criminal justice system. Evidence, we need as much evidence as possible to solve the cases. And, justice did prevail eventually. So never give up, never give hope, was the son of the Marin said. Never give hope, because, these cases will be solved eventually. And that's the thing as well. If you see a crime or something's happened, you have to tell somebody, because the victims that are associated to these crimes and their families deserve that justice. So yeah, there you go. We looked there at the blood spatter analysis. We looked at the ballistics in terms of the gunshot wounds. We looked at witness evidence as well, and that transaction stuff at the bank. All of this is really important. The crime scenes we looked at there then would be the vehicle, the wooded path where the bodies were dragged, obviously. So when you look at crimes, you remember we look at anywhere where you're going to be able to yield some evidence. So have a look at that. Put any comments in the comments below about if you want to have a bit of a research on that one, and let me know. But yeah, thank you. That's one case we're going to look at, and I will obviously add some more of the next few weeks. Thank you very much for watching. Don't commit any crimes and stay safe. Oh, and that's my cat. If you could subscribe to my channel, I'd really appreciate it, because it'll help my channel. Thank you. Bye. Hi, I'm Hayley Victoria, and welcome back to my crime and policing channel. As you can see, I'm feeling pretty festive, so if you're watching rather than listening, you can obviously see my red and green beautiful clothing and the Christmas tree and stuff in the back. If you're just listening, take it from me, I look very festive today, almost bordering on a bit Whoville, but 'tis the season and all that. Today's session, I'm going to be looking at more Christmas crimes and Christmas investigations, focusing specifically on the evidence used to capture suspects and to bring that justice to the crimes that have been committed. So in today's case, we are looking at the murder of Joanna Yeates, as she was murdered December the 17th in 2010. Now this story does jar with me a little bit, well, more than some of the others, because she was my age when she passed away. So we were born in the same year, and just think of the life that she could have had, which was tragically cut short at the age of 25. So she was a landscape architect, super intelligent, she got her life sorted out. She got a fantastic job in Bristol. She got a steady relationship, a lovely flat in Clifton. She got her life sorted out. She was doing really, really well, very successful. she was doing a cracking job. She was winning at life. And then tragically, December 17th, that was all cut short very quickly. And, you know, it was nothing that she had done that had brought that on. So a very tragic case. So let's go back to 2010. So it's not too far away, considering the cases I talk about. 2010 is quite recent, isn't it? So yeah, December 17th, Joanna and her friends from work had been to the pub, as you do after work, right? It was Friday night. They went to the pub after work to the Ram in Bristol. She had a couple of drinks, by no means was she hammered. Had a couple of drinks with friends, then set off home. On the way home, she went to Tesco, bought a pizza, which was tomato, mozzarella and basil, and a couple of bottles of cider from the nearby Bargain Booze, and went home. So about 8:45, she got home. So just before that, she'd phoned some of her friends. She'd arranged a Christmas Eve gathering with one of them, her best friend, on the phone, and then that was the last that they heard of her. Now then, about 8:45, 8:50, neighbours reported hearing 2 screams and then silence, and that was it. And it wasn't until 2 days later that they actually realised that Joanna was missing. And that's when her boyfriend, Gregory Eden, got back from Sheffield, being on a night out in Sheff with his friends. He came home to Bristol, to the flat he shared with Joanna. He'd not been getting hold of her all weekend, and he's like, this is not like her, you know. She'd actually said to her friends she didn't want to be alone over that weekend because she missed him, you know, they've got a really good relationship. And she didn't want to spend the weekend without him, understandably. And so he came back and she wasn't there, and he's like, okay, this is weird. Tried calling her again. He'd been trying to call her and text her, but no reply. And when he called her, the phone rang within the apartment. She wasn't there. So he found where the phone was, which was in a coat pocket, which was hung up. Her keys were there, her purse was there. He was worried, right? He doesn't know where she is. And that was like at 8:30 at night or something. It got to quarter to 1 in the morning, so after 12, he was like, you know what? It's not sitting right with me, something is wrong. And he phoned the police and reported her missing. And they acted quite quickly initially, so they turned up quite quickly to discover what had happened. Her boyfriend was cleared of being involved in the investigation at all after they did their initial preliminary inquiries and stuff, and he was treated as a witness. So yeah, he had nothing to do with her going missing or anything that happened to her. So I don't want people thinking it's that kind of story, because it's not. Yeah, so now they've got a missing person. They went to the flats within their a kind of apartment complex. So they live in a big house in Bristol, which had been divided into a couple of flats, like 3 flats. One of them belonging to Joanna and her boyfriend Greg, the other to Vincent Tabak and his partner. He was like an architectural engineer, and one to the landlord, Chris Jeffries. So they went to those apartments to ask some questions, do a little bit of digging, but didn't really come up with anything. This launched like a major investigation across newspapers, and the family put a big, like, you know, reward on there for any information about their missing daughter. You know, she's missing, we need to get her back for Christmas. Where is my daughter? Totally uncharacteristic. She's not the kind of person who just goes missing and doesn't come back. In their apartment as well, they did find the bottles of cider. One was partially drunk, and they didn't actually find any sign of the pizza, which is weird. So yeah, this is where we are so far. Massive nationwide hunt for her. They go and look in Vincent Tabak's house, they question Jeffries, and then it's not until Christmas Day that Joanna is found. She's found dead at the side of a road in Flayland. I think that's how I pronounce it, apologies if you don't, which is about 3 miles away from where they live, so it's a big distance from where she was. Fayland, I think it's called. I keep saying the thing, I hope it's right. Anyway, so they find her, and she's dead at the side of the road, and they don't understand at the moment how she has died. So if she's died of the cold, she's got hypothermia and passed away there, or what's happened. But the pathology reports that was conducted after they'd found her prove that she'd died from strangulation. She'd also got another 43 injuries on her body, including a fractured nose. So they immediately launched a murder inquiry. This is not someone who's fallen over after a couple of shandies and frozen to death. This is not what happened. So now we're dealing with a murder, and that's when the investigation starts gathering more pace. When you've got a serious crime like a murder, you have to get it solved. Obviously, you need to get the person who's responsible for that crime off the streets and get justice for those victims and their families. You have to. It's really important. And obviously murder is a common law offence, as we know. So The investigation continues, and they do all the usual things. So they take any samples and stuff from Joanna, from her body, and they take swabs, they look for fibres and hairs, things like that. Standard things you do when you are investigating a crime. Then they start questioning people, and Chris Jeffries, the landlord, comes into question. And at this point, Vincent de Back, the other person who lives in the complex, has gone to Amsterdam, to Netherlands, to see his family with his partner. And he sees on the news that Chris Jeffries, the landlord, is currently under investigation, has been arrested and is being interviewed. Now then, he thinks, ooh, and he phones the police and tells them, oh, Chris Jeffries borrowed my car on the night. He was using my car the night that she disappeared. I hope that's not got anything to do with it. So he gets a call from a DC, a detective constable, who arranges to go out to Schiphol Airport to interview him. And then he starts to get a bit fishy. So Vincent de Back was 25 at the time also. And he was like way too interested in the forensic investigation. Ding, 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 ding. They always go back to the scene. Well, they don't always, but a lot of the time they go back to the scene to see how they're getting on, if they're going to get caught. This is what he did. And this is where he dropped a real clanger. Because when he was originally talked to by the police, when they were doing their preliminary investigations, it was kind of getting away with stuff. But then he started changing his story. So when he was talking to this detective, giving information about Jeffries, the landlord, he was actually making himself look super suspicious. And he was like, oh yeah, borrowed my car, and I went out twice, actually, not just once. I told you once before, I went out twice. The first time I went out to take pictures of the snow. The second time, what did I do? I went to Asda. It started to sound a bit weird. And then they were like, clearly they thought this guy is something not right. And, shortly after, Chris Jeffries, the landlord, had been cleared of any wrongdoing too. There was nothing connecting him to the crime, pointing the target clearly at Vincent de Back. So when they start investigating him, they find that he's been looking at like loads of extreme violent porn on the internet, which is particularly degrading against women. And also they found some child pornography on there as well. They arrested him and spoke to him, and originally he's like pleading his innocence. He's like, no, I didn't do it, no way, no way. But he did confess to a chaplain in prison chaplain, that he had done it. He was going to plead not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter. And they looked at all this stuff, which was like the evidence on the computers and stuff, the digital evidence he'd been looking at. And they started doing more investigations into that. So I've mentioned like the violent extreme porn. And on that pornography, there was one particular video where the female involved looked quite similar to the victim, down to the colour of the top she was wearing. They found that he liked watching things where women were being degraded, like I mentioned, a lot of force by men. He'd been looking at sex workers and escorts in his area. He got a keen interest in this kind of control over women, particularly in relation to sex. And they were like, oh dear, this is not looking good. It's worth mentioning, by the way, when they did find Joanna, her trousers had not been tampered with. There was no evidence there that she had been sexually assaulted that way. They did, however, find, they take swabs of her chest, because she was exposed on one side from her top when they found her. And they did take some samples from Vincent de Back. In fact, they took those before they arrested him. And the DC at the time said she wanted to take them to just eliminate him from their inquiries in case they found evidence of him inside the flat. And he also mentioned in that interview that, he might have been in the hallway of their flat at one point. Why would you be in there, right? So obviously it was sus. They arrested him, blah, 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 took all his samples, and then they looked at the forensic evidence at the scene. So let's discuss that. So the forensic evidence they found, they did swabs of tobacco which matched DNA evidence on Joanna's body. Now they couldn't say whether that was from saliva, semen or otherwise, because there wasn't that much of it, but they managed to amplify it using those DNA enhancement techniques and prove a positive match. And there was less than 30 billion chance or something. It could have been anybody other than him. They also found fibres and hairs that matched Vincent Tabac's clothes and his car fibres to the ones that were on Joanna's jeans and her clothing. So what he had actually done is he'd put her in the trunk of his car for a while before disposing of her body 3 miles away. And obviously, you know about cross-transference of materials. Every contact leaves a trace. So you've got a primary transfer there from the suspect to the victim, which is then being revealed in investigation. That's a lot of good evidence. So we've got forensics, you've got your DNA, you've got, which was swabbed from the body and from the suspect. You've got fibres and hairs, which are transferred from clothing to clothing and from car to clothing. We've also then got confession evidence. So he did actually confess to the chaplain that he'd done it, but he didn't say he'd done it like as a premeditated thing. What he'd said was that she was flirting with him, she invited him into a flat, like, hey, you want to come for a little nightcap? She didn't, by the way. You know, she was happily involved with somebody else. He said she was flirty, invited him in, and then when he tried to kiss her, because he thought, you know, she was giving him the signs, she screamed and he panicked and put his hand over her mouth and her neck to stop her from screaming. And then within 20 seconds, she slumped and she died. It's a big accident. He panicked and then he didn't know what to do, so he put her in the boot of his car and then, you know, disposed of her later on. That's what his story was. But it's worth mentioning that the hallway in the flat where Joanna lived was like, there'd been some disturbance in there as well, which doesn't add up with somebody inviting you in for a drink, does it? No, Vincent, it does not. Luckily, the court thought that too. And, you know, he was sentenced to life in prison, which is some justice for Joanna's family. But obviously, you can never replace a member of the family. Awful, awful tragedy was found to have happened around Christmas time. So as I mentioned before, we're not looking at this to glorify crime. We're looking at it as an investigative evaluation, and we're looking at how forensic science, so we're looking at DNA, remember, fibres and hairs, and then we're looking at other evidence as well. So you've got the stuff they've been looking at on the internet, looking at the motives. He likes that gratification of being in charge of women, that control, that sexualized predatory thing. They found that, didn't they? And also he confessed to the chaplain. All that evidence has helped secure the conviction of Vincent Tabac and bring justice for Joanna's family. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great holiday, whether you celebrate Christmas or whatever else you celebrate. Happy Hanukkah, happy holidays. Have a brilliant holiday. Stay safe, look after each other, please. If you're going out around town, drinking with your friends, just make sure you share cabs. Stay at each other's houses. Don't let anybody ever walk home alone. Even if you've had a few beers, especially if you've had a few, just look after each other and stay safe. Don't commit any crimes, and I'll see you soon. Bye. Hi, I'm Hayley Victoria and welcome back to my Crime and Policing channel. As you can probably tell, if you are viewing this and not just listening to it, it's quite festive at the moment up in the north of England where I live, as it's quickly approaching Christmas. Got my fantastic tree in the background and my Christmas jumper on. You can't really see, it's got gremlins on it. Yeah, so welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all safe and well. I know it's been a challenging couple of years and this year's been no different. So in today's session, we're going to look at a true case. As always, we're not glamorizing any of the people involved in committing the crimes themselves. We're looking at it purely as a case study. In this study, we're going to be looking at the evidence which was used to help capture the suspect and bring justice to this crime for that victim. Okay, so the crime I'm talking about is the murder of Michelle O'Dowd, a 67-year-old from Jackson in Florida, on December the 2nd, 2011, which was a Friday. And that, I'm using the date there because we're going to do like a bit of a chronological term of events after that, and I want it to make sense. It was a Friday, the 2nd of December, 2011 in Jacksonville in Florida. Okay, so what happened then? How did Michelle O'Dowd end up being found dead? Well, let's give a bit of background about Michelle. So Michelle O'Dowd was apparently a really lovely woman. Lived in a nice gated community in America. You know, she was very kind, very friendly. Had affectionate nicknames in her family known as like Mickey. Mickey O, apparently. Yeah, she was lovely. She got a twin brother called Phil, grandkids, you know, she's ready for the festivities. Apparently she proper loved Christmas as well. It was a favourite time of year, always helping other people decorate the houses and stuff, buying loads of gifts for people. She was like the Christmas spirit, like personified. That was Michelle. Michelle was very kind, and due to her kindness, she helped other people. It's just what she did, you know. She's a very helpful person. One person in particular was Patty Michelle White, who was 40 at the time. And Patty White was the recent ex-girlfriend of Michelle O'Dowd's nephew. So she was a family friend, and she'd been with that nephew for like 4 or 5 years. And Michelle helped out Patty. She found herself having nowhere to live, and she kept getting herself into bits of trouble and could never hold down a job. So, you know, the O'Dowd family and an extended family used to help by giving her little odd jobs to do for money and stuff like that. She was well trusted by the family, so she was given ATM PIN numbers and stuff, the gate and security numbers to get in. She was well trusted to do those errands for people, to go and pick up the shopping with the credit cards and stuff like that. So this is a bit of the background. So I've still not told you how it happened. And you must be thinking, what are you talking about, Hayley? Well, that's because I'm building the picture behind it. So we know we've got this very family-orientated lady. She's very helpful. She helps out family members. And there's one family member, distant family member in particular, who she's been helping out a lot. Now then, it was on the Friday, on the 2nd of December, that Phil, Michelle's brother, Phil Axt, was a bit concerned about his twin sister because she'd not turned up for work, which is completely unlike Michelle. So he went to her house to check on her to see if she was all right. And when he got there, he couldn't see her, but what he did see was the house had been completely turned over. And when you say turned over up north, you mean it's been like kind of ransacked. So it's been trashed basically, as if a burglary's taken place. So there's crap everywhere, stuff's all over the place, presents everywhere. And he's like instantly thinking, this is not good, something bad has happened. And that's when he spots a foot under the tree. Now then, he spots the foot of his sister, and the rest of his sister, the body of Michelle, is covered in presents, Christmas presents for the kids, no less, right? And she got like a terry towel on her face, and she was clearly dead. So we called the authorities, and they confirmed that she'd died through strangulation and blunt force trauma. So she'd been quite a violent end that she'd met there. And like I said, she'd been covered up with the presents under the tree. It's just sick, right? Well, scratching their heads, didn't know what to do. And the night before, she'd spoken to a family member and hadn't mentioned that she wasn't by herself at the time, because she did live alone generally. What they did also find, apart from, you know, Michelle herself and the scene, was that a bank card had been stolen. Okay? And on that very day, they traced the bank transactions, and this is our evidence here that leads to our arrest. The card had been used, and debit card had been used in 2 different ATM machines, and had withdrawn £500 from each machine. Okay, it's a lot of money to take out, isn't it? Especially if you're dead. So taking out £500 from each ATM machine. Now, what you might not realise is that ATMs are usually fitted with cameras. So there's a CCTV, surveillance cameras fitted on ATM machines, and that's for security purposes. And that ATM, those ATMs, their security cameras picked up a person who was positively identified by the family as Patty Michelle White. The person who Michelle had taken in, had looked after, had helped out all those years, was the person who'd been withdrawing the money. Right, sus, right? So, obviously the police think, right, we need to go and find Patty Michelle White. And Saturday, the day after the crimes had taken place, so it's quite a quick turnaround in terms of investigation. They pull her over, and her mum's driving a car, and Patty Michelle White's in the car. They pull him over, take her in for questioning, where she subsequently confesses to the crime. So she confesses to the robbery and the murder of Michelle O'Dowd, in which she gets 45 years in prison for. It was a second-degree murder she was charged with in the end. So that's what happened, and that's a first Christmas crime of this little series. So yeah, if we're looking at the evidence, then we've got the confession evidence from Patty Michelle White herself in interview. We've got the camera footage from the ATMs and the withdrawal transactions, linking her on the day to being where Michelle was. So yeah, that's the evidence we've got there. And she was positively identified by the family members. So there you go. That's an interesting snippet for you today. I hope you've enjoyed that. Have a happy holiday, stay safe, and please don't commit any crimes. Thank you. Hi everybody, I've got 60 seconds to, well, less than 60 seconds now to tell you this short but true story about Stagger Lee. So not just a cool Nick Cave song, Stagger Lee was a real dude and really killed somebody on Christmas Day in 1895. He was in the pub, or saloon, sorry, with his friend Billy Leons in St. Louis. And they were talking about politics, which is number one, you don't talk about at Christmas, that and Monopoly, right? Talk about politics, they fell out with each other. Then apparently Stagger Lee got hold of Billy Leon's hat and was like messing about with it. And he was like, what? Grabbed Stagger Lee's hat and was messing about with that. And he was like, whoa, get off my hat. Then he shot Billy Leon's for messing about with his hat. All over hats, right? He killed his friend. Yeah, he took his hat back off his then injured friend because he just shot him in the abdomen and walked off quite calmly. He got 25 years in prison. His mate died. The end.